Wait, how should I do this? Okay, wait. I'm Mike Levy. Today, we're gonna jump into the basics of modern mountain bike geometry. Is that how I do it? You're gonna hear me say things like head angle, seat angle, reach and stack, trail and offset, wheelbase, front center, rear center, and can I go home yet? We're gonna talk about how they've changed over the years, why they've changed, and what that means for you on the trail. All right, the first one we're gonna start with is one that I'm sure a lot of you have heard before, head angle. Now, the definition of this one is pretty simple. It's the angle of your fork measured from horizontal. Now, if you wanna be technically correct about it, it's actually the angle of the steering axis measured from horizontal. Generally speaking, it's the first number that a lot of us look at when determining how a bike is going to handle. It has a big factor in how the bike will handle, but it is by far not the only factor, especially these days. Now, generally speaking, bikes meant for tamer terrain, cross-country bikes, things like that, bikes with less travel, they will have steeper head angles and they're meant to handle quicker because they're probably not going as fast and they're on flatter ground. But when things get steep, they can feel sketchy, and that's where a bike like this Yeti SB165 with a really slack head angle comes into play. But when the ground is flat, it can feel really floppy and lazy and hard to steer. All right, next up, seat tube angle. Does anybody know what that's referring to? Wrong, it's the angle of your seat tube. That sounds simple, right? It's not. Of course, there are two different ways to measure this. There's the actual seat tube angle and there's the effective seat tube angle. And of course, they mean different things. So, actual is kind of what it sounds like. It's the actual measure of the seat tube. Now, the issue there is that seat tubes sometimes start 3 inches ahead of the bottom bracket. Sometimes they start right above it. They start all over the place. So, that doesn't really tell you where the seat is going to end up when you have it where it needs to be. That's where effective seat tube angle comes in. Effective seat tube angle is a lot more useful these days, and it's measured by drawing a line from the center of the bottom bracket up to a certain height position. It's what determines how over the bottom bracket you feel while you're pedaling. Now, these numbers have changed a lot over the years. Right now, poles production stamina, 78.6 degrees. That's 4 to 6 degrees steeper than a lot of bikes just a few years ago. And there are still bikes being sold today that are steeper. I did say steeper, yeah. And there are still bikes being sold today that are 4, 5 degrees slacker than that. So why are seat tube angles getting steeper? A lot of it has to do with reach numbers getting longer. Now we're going to talk about reach next, but it's basically think the front of the bike is growing, is getting longer. And if seat angles stayed slack, it would put your seat way back here and you would feel really stretched out. Now, as bikes get longer, the seat angles get steeper and it helps move that weight forward so the front end stays planted on climbs. And it's why you could have very slack head angles without them feeling super floppy. They're actually pretty good climbers, and a lot of it has to do with that steep seat angle. So reach is something that you've probably seen a lot of lately, and what that refers to is the measurement from the center of your head tube back horizontally to a line measured vertically up from the bottom bracket. Now this gives you an idea anyway, of what the front of the bike will feel like when you're standing up. Reach numbers have gotten quite a bit longer over the last few years. These days, you can find a medium-sized bike going anywhere from, 440 millimeters up to 470 millimeters. It's important to remember that there's no right or wrong here. Shorter's fine too, it's fine, short's okay. For some perspective, if you go back to 2015, reach numbers were at least 20 to 30 millimeters shorter. So yeah, things have gotten bigger over the last few years. Next up is stack. Now we're going to talk about more imaginary lines here. This one is going up from the bottom bracket until it intersects the same line that we use to figure out the reach. Picture your bottom bracket in relation to your handlebars. Trail is the distance between the tire's contact patch with the ground and the steering axis. Bikes with larger wheels will have more trail as well. So a 29er will have more trail than a bike with a 27.5 inch front wheel. And a slacker bike will also have more trail. That's why slacker bikes feel more stable when it's steep or you're going fast. All right.
3 at once this time.
And then we're done. Front center, rear center, and wheelbase. Now, these are exactly like what they sound like. Front center is a measurement from the center of the bottom bracket to your front axle. Now, as reach numbers have grown longer and head angles have gotten slacker, guess what's happened? Front centers have gotten longer, and that's where less offset comes in to help with that. Now, rear center is measured from the center of the bottom bracket to the axle. Longer rear centers, now that means more stability. So these have gotten as long as around 450 millimeters on some bikes, but when they get too long, when you combine it with the long front center, then you have a huge wheelbase and the whole thing feels like you're trying to drive a Winnebago through a Costco parking lot on Christmas Eve. Nothing but trouble. So what does all that rambling mean? Well, a big takeaway here is that there's no such thing as the perfect geometry. Despite what some of these companies are telling you, geometry is all over the board, and what one person likes, it's not the same as another person. So there you have it, modern mountain bike geometry in a nutshell. More versatility and way more capability. But is it gonna go farther? Are bikes gonna continue to get slacker? Are bikes gonna continue to get longer? Have you seen our Grim Donut geometry project? It is long and slack, and the seat tube is so steep. Let us know in the comments below where you think we're heading with all this geometry stuff.